All right, I think we can start. Um, Let me check that everything works. Okay, so couple words about me. I'm a front-end engineer for 6 years now. Mostly I worked on different product projects with React ecosystem. Also co-founded two small startups. And before software engineering career, I worked in logistics, like pretty different career from that. And I'm basically self-taught. And currently I'm working in a product company that is the biggest real estate classified in Russia. Basically the first place people would go if they want to buy or sell or rent an apartment or any other real estate type, basically office, garage, anything. We have 20 million people coming to us every month and 2 million active property listings from our users, and this listing form the major part of the content. So today I'm going to talk about one of the services that is the main source of that content, which makes it one of the most critical services for our business, the property listing form. And this is a pretty complicated product because we have around 40 different types of properties, basically 40 different types of branches of this form inside of like one form, and they sometimes are dependent on each other, and this complicates things even further. So this service is one of the oldest on the platform. It's presented on all three platforms, web and to mobile applications, which are inside native apps. And the situation is kind of the same for all platforms. The service is very hard to maintain. It was written a long time ago by outsourced team, and there was some major architectural mistakes done that block updates to modern stack, at least on the web. So by now, the listing form has almost every typical problem of a legacy service. It has no documentation, has no test, no guidelines. All teams contribute to it, but no one really knows how it works inside. Gradually, it became one of the biggest sources of problems for us. It's very hard to plan any features when no one knows how exactly the service works under the hood. The releases are kind of slow, really slow, and also unsynchronized between platforms, and it's very easy to introduce some critical bugs because of that. So all these problems led to a situation where it became really hard for the product to grow. People are mostly busy with fixing bugs, doing some really small changes, and now that's typically not what business wants. So our developers team decided that we needed some radical changes and made a decision to rebuild the whole service. Basically, our goal was to be able to deliver features with as less people as possible, as fast as possible, and we gathered and made a list of things that would help us to achieve that goal. This is the list. As I mentioned, we have 3 platforms plus backend, total 4 stacks, and we want any feature to be released maximum by 4 developers. So 1 person per stack per change. Most of our releases should be done in one day. We want some framework that would dictate how we build product. Basically, we want some systematic approach to our development processes. We want to reuse as much logic and as much components as we can, and we want many teams, many other teams in the future to be able to contribute and to be able to integrate into our product. But at the same time, we want to be the only team who maintains the product. And also we want the new form to be at least as good as the old one. So this is about business outcomes. This is kind of where we are now. We didn't achieve all of our goals perfectly, but we are on the way, and we achieved some pretty amazing results. So the answer for us was this backend-driven UI approach, which is basically when clients stay agnostic of what UI they will need to show. They only need to become some sort of an engine that passes some info from backend, and the responsibility of backend would be generating of interfaces. For user, this would look like a normal UI. Nothing should really change because we don't want to sacrifice our user experience. We also don't want any limitations for our designers. But under the hood, we need to split our UI to some number of parts or components which frontend will recognize in the scheme that backend will send. So this red field on the slide will look something like this when it comes to the client. Basically some declarative information of what should be on the screen. But currently we have only the vision that we need to rebuild the form. We don't have any idea of how exactly we'll implement it. And also the backend-driven UI approach is not the only one. For us, we need to compare the alternatives. So our plan would be, first of all, to pick the approach. We will analyze all the alternatives, and after choosing the approach, we will need to agree on how will we implement it. We also need to decide about stack and tools. Ideally, everything should be native for every platform. After implementation, we need to prepare and analyze our results, the results both for development and for business, and also we need to highlight all the unresolved issues and challenges that remained. So the initial idea was to just write everything to modern stack and stick to this approach. This would remove some blockers for us, but probably it will also give us a boost in the product growth for a while, but most of our systematic problems will remain. We will still have all the business logic spread into 4 different platforms, and that will cause a lot of pain anyway. The web view would solve a lot of issues with complexity because we'll reduce the number of platforms to 2, web and backend, but this can ruin the user experience on mobile platforms because, web view doesn't really work great on native applications. And backend-driven UI seemed to solve all our problems, but at the start we knew that it will be really expensive and pretty risky because there is no documentation, there is not much experience of other companies with this approach. So yeah, we decided, not surprising, decided to go with this approach. And now we need to decide how we will implement that approach. So there are some aspects of implementation. First of all, the scope of applicability, what parts of the pages should be backend-driven UI and what are traditional ones. Also, we need to agree on stakeholders that we invest a lot of time in something very risky and that we will be building the platform for a pretty big period of time. So also we need to decide about our component-based approach, both in design and code. We need to decide about the contract. It's the most important thing. It's basically the language that backend will speak to the clients. The development experience is about how do you make experience of building this new interfaces smooth for developers, because the UI will be written by backenders. And of course, we need to think about how do we adapt to our new development processes. So about the scope of applicability, this is our current vision of the scope. The backend-driven UI approach is used on all the form stuff, and we keep normal architecture for things like helper sidebar or anything basically else around the form, because we don't want any limitations for designers when they are communicating to the users. We decided about our roles. Also, our roles will be building the engine first, and this would take most of the time. And after that, we test it on one of the property types and build one branch of real form with it. And after we measure some results, we will just stick to the supporting and consulting other teams and building their own forms based on our engine. So about reusability. As we start, we have some design prototypes, and like I showed on the screenshot before, we need to divide all pages into different components. And most of those components will map pretty easily on our design system and UI kit. Those are usually small components like buttons, simple fields, typography, etc. But right away we noticed that we have some bigger parts that can look like a combination of smaller components connected by some business logic. One example of such would be address input, when we have like input with autocomplete of address. We also have interactive map, and it can calculate the distance to subway. And also for some buildings, we can also choose the building number. So this is a pretty complex component. We call them internally helicopters because of this complexity. And basically this is a widget, but all the complex logic is mostly for user interactions, and the data it will send to the server is usually pretty simple. With a case of address input, the output will be just the address string, and we also have an example of such component, photo picker. It has an ability to upload photos. You can edit photos. You can have a small gallery, but the output will still be just an array of URLs. So we build these helicopters and keep it as a separate component, just like any button or field. This an example of such component. This is an address input. It has the map. It can have also some different options for different property types. So there is also a third type of components, which is the biggest one. It's called micro frontends. It's literally a micro frontend. We won't dive deep into the implementation of how do we do it in our company, but the idea here is that the line between this type of components and previous one is who maintains the component. Usually with micro frontends, this will be the whole separate team. For us, this would look at the code like really simple. We just need to mention what micro frontend we will use, and all other stuff is happening on the side of this component. So also we sometimes need to add some API layer that will allow micro frontend to communicate with the form. Like sometimes it will need to get the form state. So this is about reusability. Now the contract part. Here we need to imagine that we are building this language that backend will communicate frontend what to show on the page. And for that, we will need to answer some how-to questions, like how do we handle the situation where one component is dependent on another? How do we do validation? How do we make the layout adaptive for different screen sizes? And what if, like, for example, the page should look totally different on mobile from desktop? Also, what do we do with state management if well, basically, if we don't even know what fields will be on the page on the first place. Also, these things make contract most interesting and challenging parts. So now we've mentioned our three types of components: atoms, like small components, helicopters, and micro frontends. Also, the big question would be, how do we do such things as validation? Since we're building form, validation part is kind of a big part of it. And here things can get pretty tricky because we have two types of validation, usually server and client, and also client validation can be standard and a bit more complex. By a bit more complex, I mean that sometimes validation of one field can be dependent on the other field, but in our situation, our components are fully independent. Like one field doesn't know about the other field and doesn't even know that this other field is on the page. So example of such validation would be, like, for example, when user enters the floor number of his apartment, and this floor number cannot be bigger than total number of floors in the building. And those are two different fields. They're pretty, like, absolutely independent from each other. So for that situation, we have two types of solutions, actually, the JavaScript and expressions. With JavaScript, it kind of looks like this. Basically, backend can execute some JavaScript code on the client and do something with the state. It can look at different fields in the state because, well, backend knows what fields are on the page. It can just address some fields, and it will return something. Basically, can return the new state, or maybe it will return some action to show some error. With expression, the situation is almost the same, but it's limited to a set of rules that can be applied. We cannot just execute any code here, and expression will result in some Boolean value that will indicate should we show or should we not show the error. And the same approach actually can be used not only for validation, but for any other conditional stuff like visibility, editability, or even value change. Like, for example, we can reset some value of some field when the value of another field changes. Or, an example, we can show or hide some field when other field value changes. So about the structure, we have two types of structure, flat and nested. That's mostly because of our internal infrastructure of limitations. And usually we want to choose one. In our case, we have two, again, because of our own limitations. The flat structure would look something like that. We have a source map with all info about every component that is in the page, but without any order, basically like a database of components. And also, at the same time, we need to we need some kind of a list or grid which indicates the order of components, and inside it has just information on how to look that component in the source map. And with the nested approach, this approach combines basically source map and order and gives the opportunity to have infinite number of different nested containers with own rows and columns that client will pass recursively. And this approach is more flexible, in my opinion, because of this recursion stuff, actually. So we use the flat approach on the web and nested approach on mobile platforms. So we also have to think about how would we structure things on the page, how will they interact with each other. And for that, we have grid that is close to a CSS grid, but we have 12 column markup with every component, where every component can take some space up to 12 columns and put, well, basically to put, for example, two fields one next to each other, we need to put two 6-column components. But that wasn't flexible enough for us, and we added another layer. And now instead of components, we can add container with components that inside has flexbox logic in it. And the flexbox is also close to a CSS flexbox, but written like in more declarative way. And on mobile platform, we use Jetpack Compose. Well, I actually don't know any specifics of how they use it. Basically, this is how they style things there. So let's move to the state. Usually we have an approach like this on a client, traditional approach. We have some state on the client, we store it in some state manager, and then gather something from the state and send it to backend. But we quickly found out that this is not enough, and we need some kind of mechanism that when server can update the state. Like, for example, user wants to sell an apartment and fills the address, and by that address, we can fill some values in other fields for the user, like pre-fill some values, like, for example, which year the building was built. So our scheme with remote modification will look something like that. Something changes in the client, we send it to backend, and backend it does some magic inside and give us the new state. And this is the example of such approach. The user just clicks on the address, and we see that some values in some field are filled for the user, like automatically. And this brings us to actions. Actions are basically the events that will trigger those state updates or any other things we can do. Basically, when we can hang these events to anything, like user clicked on some component or changed some field or focused on or unfocused some field, and by that event we can do some server request or some local change. For formatting, a typical example of formatting is a font field. It's done by mask usually, and this is simple. Usually all common cases basically are supported by our UI kit, so we don't have to think about it too much, but there are also some cases where we need combination of validation and formatting. So some validation like contract will be used here, like remember expressions and JS, something like that. So for the development process, we need to think about several things here. First of all, how do we not forget anything? Also, how do we keep the buzz factor not too low? Also, how do we integrate other teams? How do we secure that this integration is smooth for our for other teams? So for that, we prepared a full documentation with every implementation detail, examples, etc. We also need to think about our development experience because, as I've said, backenders will build the UIs and they will need to see what they are building. And for that, we built a sandbox that allows them to see the results of the scheme they are building. And when you click the render button, you will see the UI that you've created so far. For mobile platforms, we have the same sandbox, but with some mobile-specific options. One of the issues that many people highlighted when we were getting the initial approval for a backend-driven UI approach was test. How would we test things? And it turned out not to be such a big problem because we use functional tests for the engine itself and for every component. And also we need to separately test some basic scenarios and conditions. For almost everything, we use a functional test in Playwright, and we also have some unit tests for different utility functions. After release, we have some new roles for some people that will ensure the correct work of our new development process. This will secure that we don't add new components just for one use. And if we need to add a new component, it will be first added to our design system and validated by our design lead. After that, the development platforms will create a new contract for that component and validate that it fits correctly. And then the designer is allowed to use component in his new prototypes. So for the stacks on front end, basically we have every platform using a native stack. They are not limited to any tools, and their only job is basically to interpret the contract, which is really not platform specific. It's just a JSON file. So on front end, we use React. We have some utility functions from forming to update some form states. We use Playwright for tests and some of our internal tools. Backend uses Python and its ecosystem. iOS uses Swift, and Android uses Kotlin. What about the results? The first thing we noticed is the split between backend and frontend. We anticipated it, but at the same time, we kind of weren't really ready for such strange balance. We have around 75% of all changes done only on backend, and the number will grow because our component base is growing, which means that basically reusability is growing. So first thing about the results, we have only one platform now for all the business logic, the backend, and that allowed us to reduce our time to market significantly. Like most changes are now delivered only in one day by basically just changing something in the scheme. And this is especially great for mobile platforms because they don't have to make another release and to get the approval of the App Store. And what's important, users don't need to update the app to see the changes. Just like that, we can have all users updated to the latest version of our product. Also, the fact that these changes will be synchronous among all platforms is great. We reuse all the business logic, and almost all components are also reused, like among the platform too, in the design system and in the code. And now we are not blocked from any stack updates. About the business results, the new form is still an A/B experiment. It currently serves around 50% of all of our traffic. And already now we see a significant improvement in business metrics. We have, I think, around 5 to 7% conversion rate better than the old one. But even if we had the same results, it would be enough for us. So we still have a lot of open questions and challenges, some new challenges. So one of those would be, should we use this approach for other pages? Like, where is the line for this approach? Also, we have this problem of backend overload. How do we handle it? How do we plan for new features? And what will our front-enders will do also? So the next thing will be, how do we balance limitations to design with good user experience? Basically, how customized our widgets can be to still be maintainable. Also, we need to think about probably using some external solutions in the future. For now, we didn't find any flexible enough for us, so we have our own, but still an open question. So, in conclusion, I'd like to give you some list of questions that you definitely should ask yourself when thinking about implementing something like that. The list would be like, how important is native UX for you? Do you have like this long release cycle, and is it a big problem for you? Do you have multiple platforms and also multiple teams working inside of one product? Do you have a lot of template changes and a lot of simple logic that can be written in some simple rules? And if the answer to those is yes, so you should consider all the factors, and if all the benefits of the approach is worth the risk that it brings, I think you should definitely give it a shot. So this is it for me. If you have any questions, please ask them in the chat. Currently, I don't see any questions. You also can just raise your hand and or unmute and ask it by the voice. All right. Since there's no any questions, that's all for today. Thank you for joining me, and feel free to comment on the event page with any questions. Thank you very much. You can also contact me in the Oh, thank you very much. I think I will save this. Could you please tell what's that? Turbo HTMX? No, we actually didn't consider. We didn't know about such thing. Hard to explain. I think we'll at least check it out. It's there's not much open source tools for this approach, so can render to mobile. Yeah, we actually have like research one open source solution is from Yandex, the biggest IT company in our country. They have it also for mobile, but we need to support also the web. Like the web was actually first for us, but probably if this thing can also support web, we can use something like that. Yeah. Okay. Again, thank you very much. Feel free to comment in the comments or to just text me by any of these mentioned contacts. Thank you very much. That's it. Bye bye.